So, hello and welcome to today's American Community Media Briefing. I'm Sunita Sarabji, co-producer of our weekly Friday briefings, along with my dear colleague, Pilar Marrero. Summer is typically a time for travel, with Americans going to far-flung destinations abroad, foreign students coming in to begin their studies at U.S. universities, and tourists from all over the world soaking up Americana. But President Donald Trump's high-profile deportations, including green card holders and in rare cases, US citizens, have deterred many from traveling. Speakers this week will advise us of rights when stopped at the border or at the airport. They will also discuss the uptick in Customs and Border Protection searches of cell phones and devices, the impact of extreme vetting on foreign students, and the rare cases as of now of people being coerced into giving up their green cards as they attempt to re-enter the US. To be clear, we don't want to sound alarmist. This briefing is meant to equip you and your readers and viewers with the strategies and rights they can lean on if stopped or searched while traveling. So our esteemed guests today are Zahra Billoo, Executive Director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations in the San Francisco Bay Area; Richard Herman, founder of the Herman Legal Group; Madhurima Paturi, founder and partner of the Paturi Law Group; and Xiao Wang, founder and CEO of Boundless Immigration. We are tremendously honored to have you all here today. Reporters, please enter your questions in the chat, and we will try to address as many as we can immediately after each speaker presents. So we begin with Zahra Billoo, who will provide an overview of rights for documented and undocumented people at the border and at the airport. Welcome, Zahra.
Thank you so much, Sunita, and to everyone for coming together this morning for this important conversation. Sunita, when we were preparing to go live a few minutes ago, you asked a question, and if you don't mind, I'll start with that. You asked, what's the most disturbing or difficult story or phone call we've received to date? I received one about 6 weeks ago from a student visa holder in good standing on all accounts, who reached out to me on the eve of when we thought a Muslim ban was coming. And he says, I'm from a country that's on this list of published countries by the New York Times. I'm engaged and my wedding is set for a couple of weeks from now. Should I go? And it's so hard to tell somebody to choose between the love of their life and their ability to continue their education in the United States. I explained the possibility that he might not be able to return if the ban was implemented before he did return. And he chose to delay his wedding. I don't envy him. My heart broke for him, right? Everybody looks forward to their wedding. Hopefully we only have one. Some of us have a couple. The point is, it's a big deal. So what are our rights at the border? And why did this matter for this man? US citizens have an absolute right to re-enter the United States. They don't have a right to fly into the United States. That's a privilege. They don't have the right to hassle-free travel. That's also a privilege, but they have an absolute right to re-enter the United States. And so our advice to US citizens has been, please don't change anything about what you're doing and how you're doing it, because as much ground as we cede right now during the Trump administration, it will not come back to us in 3 or 3.5 years. When you travel, make sure that you are fully prepared, that you know and have said, I like to actually tell my audiences, say it out loud. I'm going to choose to remain silent. Why is that question relevant to my re-entry? Because if you've never said it before, you won't say it under pressure. You won't say it when you're scared. So you have a right to re-enter the country. They could hold you, they could question you, they could search your belongings. And yes, that includes your electronic devices also. So my other advice to our clients and attendees is always, one, disable all biometric ID from your devices. You can be forced to use your fingerprint or your face to unlock your phone. You can never be forced to turn over your password. So people ask, like, do I need a burner phone? Do I this? Do I that? Sure, the less personal data there is on devices you are carrying across borders, the better. But even the little you might have on a burner phone, like your best friend's phone number, the Facebook group that you're in, all of it becomes insecure the moment you turn over your password. And so disable biometric ID and never ever give law enforcement your password. Could they take away your phone? Yes, they could. And if they do, they'll be required to give you a receipt. They'll still be required to talk to a supervisor or a judge to get further into your phone than they could get if you didn't give them the password. Now, non-citizens, this is really, these are new days. I used to be able to tell green card holders that they were pretty safe. I actually still remember that on March 6th, I told a group of green card holders, pretty safe. And then Mahmoud Khalil was abducted by ICE agents right outside of his apartment. So green card holders and visa holders, we've advised, minimize your non-essential travel. As your lawyer, as your advocate, as your media spokesperson, I'm not always going to be in a position to tell you what's essential or non-essential. Is your wedding essential? I would think so, but maybe it can wait. Is your sick mother essential? Probably very urgent, right? And so it's going to depend. But for non-citizens, we've advised that they minimize non-essential travel. The harsh truth is non-citizens do not have a right to re-enter the country. They are assessed for admissibility. In other words, are we going to give them permission to come back in every time they present themselves at a border? So they can be asked all of the same things a citizen is going to decline to answer. Who are you with? Who did you visit? Who paid for your trip? All of those things. Mind you, they can ask that of anyone. But our advice to US citizens is don't answer those questions. Our advice to non-citizens is to be aware of the risk you take in answering or not answering. If you answer these questions, if you give up your password to your phone, you are sacrificing a lot of privacy and potentially endangering not just yourself, but the people who are connected to you. In my years of representing people who are visited by law enforcement, one of the most fascinating types of complaints we will receive is from people who have never had a law enforcement interaction, but somebody said their name or they showed up in someone's phone when they were coming across a border. And then the FBI visited them, right? We have to remember these agencies are all talking to each other, which is why I love the idea of this briefing, because we all need to be talking to each other as well, right? So there's a risk of what privacy am I going to sacrifice if I give up this information, if I give them my password, if I answer the questions at the border. But that has to be balanced with the risk of I may not be able to re-enter the United States, right? This CBP officer could decide that I'm not admissible, in which case I am going back to exactly where I came from on a return flight, generally within 24 to 36 hours. It's a lot more difficult to do that for green card holders. So I want to be clear. Green card holders are in this in between. US citizens are always coming back into the country. Green card holders are going to deal with other things like higher targeting because they are not US citizens. They should not, and I know one of our other speakers will talk about this later today or later in the hour, they should not be giving up their green card at the border. They should not be signing any documents to that effect. And they're not going to be sent back to where they came from. But their rights are compromised at the border in a way that US citizens are not burdened with. Non-citizens, their student visas, work visas, tourist visas, those get pulled and turned around very quickly. And so one of the other types of difficult calls we will get is from a family member of a non-citizen who says, my relative has not emerged from the airport yet. It's been 2 hours. Okay, it's been 4. It's been 6. Generally by the 6-hour mark, we know that they are just looking for the flight to put the person back on. And so it's a difficult decision for non-citizens at the border. Am I going to assert my rights and compromise my ability to re-enter, or am I going to give up all of this information and instead put everyone around me in danger? So with all that said, the takeaways I always want to make sure everybody remembers. You always have the right to remain silent, and you always have the right to an attorney, no matter who you are, where you are, and so on. Asserting those rights will look and feel different. If you're a US citizen, you're coming into the US at the border no matter what. And we have sued in instances where the government has attempted to block people from coming in. Sometimes, for example, by making it impossible for them to board a plane, but they will come back. Non-citizens, tread carefully because your ability to enter the United States is not guaranteed. And depending on the type of non-citizen you are, the most precarious being visa holders, the government has long turned people around at the border. They did that under Trump 1, they did it under Biden, and they will continue to do it under Trump 2. And so it's really important that you're aware of the risks of crossing borders and whether or not you're going to be able to come back and what that means. I'll stop here and I'm happy to take a couple of questions.
Thank you. There are a number of questions for you. Let's start with Michael Fitzgerald. Michael, would you please identify your news organization and ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me
Yes.
on board here? Okay. Michael Fitzgerald. I work for a newspaper in upstate New York called the Finger Lakes Times. And my question is, you said at the beginning that flying is different than walking across the border. Where could you go expand on that a little bit?
Of course. Thank you for that question. US citizens have an absolute right to enter the United States. Flying and driving are both considered privileges, right? And so they come with other caveats. And so the government could block someone from getting on a plane. And so they've done this, for example, through the no-fly list. The government could block someone from driving across a border or even just driving on our streets because there are so many restrictions around driving. In the past 20 years, as we've litigated cases around the no-fly list, we've had clients who have been advised, well, you can't get on a plane. Like, you are not allowed to fly over US airspace, but you're a US citizen, so you have a right to enter, which could mean you're going to fly to Mexico, hopefully on a flight that doesn't cross into US airspace and then cross over. You're going to fly to Toronto and then cross over. So they cannot block you from entering, but they can restrict how and how much hassle you have as you come in.
Okay. Thank you.
Araceli Martinez is next. Araceli from La Opinion. Please ask your question.
Hello, Sunita. I have seen in social media in groups that we have a lot of undocumented asking once very often that if it says for undocumented immigrants to travel to Hawaii and Puerto Rico because they used to do that before Trump. And also many of them, they used to travel around the country from California to Washington or any other state. So they are questioning if it's safe for undocumented to travel around the country and to visit other states like Puerto Rico and Hawaii. Thank you.
That's a great question, and I very much empathize with the fear. We are hearing from US citizens who are afraid to get on planes, and so I can imagine it's very terrifying for someone who's not documented. At this time, immigrants' rights groups have not advised undocumented people against domestic travel. Are you taking a risk every time you encounter law enforcement? Yes. Are you keeping up with the real ID requirements? Are you able to, depending on where you are and how your DMV is working on that? Those are, I think, other questions that impact this, but at this time, there is no advice against domestic travel for undocumented people that I am aware of. And so if my fellow panelists will come on and disagree, I would definitely welcome that. The question of living with fear is so difficult. Less than 1% of people are going to be impacted by this, but one of the intentions that we've seen of the Trump administration is to cause everyone to be fearful and be in panic.
Our next question comes from Elena Kuznetsova of Slavic SAC. Elena, please ask your question.
Hi, hello, thank you for letting me ask my question. So the question is, Does it make any difference what type of green card an immigrant has? I mean, if if the green card is based on political asylum or marriage or something else, or just any green card holder is under risk? Thank you. I have a flight tomorrow, so I'm nervous. Thank you.
Understandable. Elena, maybe I'll see you at the airport. Though I'm a citizen, I'm committed to protecting you at airports too, and I have a flight tonight and one later this weekend as well. One quick thing on the domestic travel before the green card thing that I want to, the distinction is in domestic travel, you are not interacting with Customs and Border Protection, right? That's who's checking your immigration status when you are coming across or coming through an airport. And so that's why Hawaii is fine. That's why Puerto Rico is fine. That's why Washington, D.C. is fine. Because though you are interacting with federal law enforcement agents, you're not generally going to be interacting with Customs and Border Protection. Elena, to your question, look, our broad advice is to minimize non-essential travel. Candidly, I don't love the advice because how do I tell you what is essential and what is non-essential? If you cannot change your trip, please go on it and enjoy yourself. There's a less than 1% chance that anything will happen to you. The type of green card is not a factor when we do risk assessment. I will share something I didn't share prior, which is that when we do risk assessments, we are looking at criminal record, we are looking at prior deportation orders, and we are looking at political activity and targeting. So for example, among pro-Palestine activists who are non-citizens, we're looking at, are you on Canary mission? Has Batar targeted you? Are pro-Israel groups sending your name to the White House as some claim to be doing? And so there are a variety of risk factors. Again, to summarize, they include criminal record and background, they include prior deportation orders, and they include political activity. And even in those cases, it's not a yes or no or a black or white answer, but those are the things we're considering. We are not at this time considering risk factors based on how the person obtained their green card.
Thank you. Our final question for you comes from Orhan Akurt. Orhan, would you please ask your question?
Thank you, Sunita. So the question is, do you have any idea about how long this policy will take? Can we consider this policy will be in place for another 4 years, or something might happen, changes? Do you have any idea on this?
So I'm dialing in from a conference I'm attending, and the keynote at the morning plenary said, we are no longer at the precipice of fascism. We are in fascism. I don't think any of us anticipate the Trump administration rolling back any of its anti-immigrant policies. Instead, we see them continuing to add to the policies, add to the restrictions, experiment with new things, go to court and defend themselves, go to court and lie about it. So we don't anticipate the Trump administration changes course. The other thing I want to note, though, is I don't think that it gets better in 4 years if a Democrat is elected to president. And this is where it's so important, particularly for US citizens, to be on the front lines of advocacy, asserting their rights and protecting others. Because we saw that when Bush left office after 8 years, Obama came in and did not repeal any of his policies. And so whatever ground we cede as residents of the United States during the Trump administration is not simply given back to us at the end of the 4 years. We will have to keep fighting. And so don't let up because you think it'll just come back. It won't.
Zahra, thank you. Before you leave, I wanted to ask you if you could briefly explain the Canary mission and then give us your 1-minute soundbite of the most important piece you want reporters to take away from your remarks.
Sure. Thank you, Sunita. Canary Mission is one of several pro-Israel groups that works to highlight and then dock pro-Palestine advocates. It's been in operation for over a decade. There are thousands of people on the site, everyone from students and teachers to faculty members and advocates like myself. They make it a habit of finding your pictures, every statement you've made about Palestine, and in some cases, even going so far as to then send all of that information to future and prospective employers and or university administrators and admissions offices. And they operate on the very concerning principle or practice of using anti-Semitism as a cudgel to silence and censor all critique of Israel. We make a distinction between critique of Israel and anti-Semitism. We need to be able to distinguish the two, because if we cannot, we water down and make it difficult to actually combat real anti-Semitism. And we go silent in the face of the worst human rights violations live streamed on social media in our lifetimes. My 1 minute takeaway, and I'll go even shorter than that, is no matter your immigration status, you always have the right to remain silent. You can never talk yourself out of trouble, but you can very often talk yourself into trouble. US citizens always have a right to re-enter the country, and we want them to be proud of asserting all of their rights and traveling and speaking out, because we need to protect our civil rights even during this administration. The ground that we cede now will not simply be restored at the end of the Trump administration. Non-citizens, green card holders, and visa holders, we recommend that if you have questions about your rights, that you reach out to our organization or any of the great immigration leaders you will hear from on this call and our colleagues to get specific and individual assessment of your risk factors, as well as advice on how to stay safe and continue to reside in our country.
Zahra, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We move on to Richard Herman, who will discuss Customs and Border Patrol social media searches at the airport and at the border. Richard, welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Sunita, and Zahra, thank you for that wonderful presentation. This is really an unprecedented point in U.S. history. The U.S. is not a stranger to ripping up the Constitution and making it a document of convenience. For example, we've interned American citizens in internment camps during World War II, whether Japanese Americans, or German Americans, or Italian Americans. We've done atrocious things to our own people. But what's different, I think, this time is the vast amounts of technology that can be deployed by an authoritarian government against us, whether it's facial recognition technology or AI. I mean, as we've seen with the international student revocations of their CVIS and F1 visas, we learned in federal court, because people were filing lawsuits, we learned that there really wasn't a plan to analyze each student's records. It was kind of an AI download. If somebody engaged with law enforcement, they might have been arrested for something, might have been charged with DUI. Even if they're not formally charged or convicted, they ended up in that database. And guess what? Their CVIS was revoked. And that's where the federal courts, and Trump doesn't like to lose, and he was losing over and over and over and over. And that's what caused them to kind of switch gears, at least temporarily, and admit we don't really have a non-arbitrary, a non-capricious framework to revoke these statuses. So that's kind of what happened. So I think that's what's different this time around, is the use of technology against us. I call this period of time the Great Unwelcoming. It's an increasingly hostile view to immigrants and internationals generally. Airports now are not just a place to land and walk through customs. They're immigration enforcement zones. And it's not just foreign nationals. Americans are going through these. American lawyers, for example, we had multiple cases of American lawyers, American citizen lawyers being detained and their electronics being confiscated, and they tried to invade the attorney-client privilege and seek that electronic data in the attorney phones. So again, this is unprecedented civil rights violations, and everybody should be concerned, not just the immigrant community, but the American-born community as well. And I agree with Zahra. It's not like they're going to flip a switch and your rights come back. When rights are taken away, they stay eroded and at risk and vulnerable for a long time generally. But when I hear these stories and I hear us talking today, I mean, I do have this foreboding sadness for the country because there's a cost to this. And as Zahra said, it's really affecting only 1% of folks. So we'll talk about some of the data today about in electronic searches of the border, and it is de minimis, generally speaking. But the goal is really to inflict fear and anxiety on everybody, right? To make it, and so I recently did a panel discussion out of London, and the discussion was about tourism from Europe to the US. Should we even come for vacation? Like Sunita, you were saying this is vacation season, and the kids want to go to Disney World in the US, and we want to go to the Grand Canyon, but we're reading all these scary things in the media. And countries like Canada, Germany, Denmark, Ireland, Finland are issuing travel advisories about coming to the United States. When the US issues travel advisories, it's like to countries where there's, mass problems and, crime and earthquakes and terrorism and all this. Well, now our allies, Canadians, Europeans are saying, we're hearing stories of Canadians being detained at the border for weeks, being sent into jail cells and shackled. We're hearing stories of, they don't even have blankets. They have like these tinfoil things that they give to people. Again, this is unprecedented. In that panel, we were talking about the economic cost to the United States. And just for our listeners today, foreign tourists spend $100 billion a year in the US. On education, international students spend about $50 billion. Business visitors spend about $23 billion. We were expecting a 5% increase in tourism and visitors this year until Trump came in. And then the Trump slump that he self-inflicted on the country with immigration restrictions, tariffs, all this crazy stuff. We're now expecting a 9% decline in tourism in the United States, which will probably cost about $64 billion. I mean, just from our good friends in Canada, we demeans and threatens all the time, which you don't do to your friend and neighbor. And I live in Cleveland, and my neighbor across Lake Erie is Canada. In February alone, road travel from Canada to the US was down 23%. 23%. Air travel was down 13%. So that's having an impact on businesses along the border that cater that. To those visitors. So anyway, so there's going to be an economic cost to pay for all this. International students, they're more and more of them are saying, "Why should I come here?" Right? It's not worth it. They don't want me. If I'm from India, I might have to wait 15, 20 years for a green card anyway. Right, which is why Canada has come down to the U.S. and recruited high-skilled, disgruntled immigrants to say, America doesn't want you. We know that talent is the new oil, drill, baby, drill, and we want to build more talent in the U.S. Come up here. We'll give you a green card in a year. We'll give you citizenship in 3 years. So I think the U.S. is going to really experience a huge drop-off of international talent and visitors and other things because people are saying it's not worth it. Coming to the airport. Now, in terms of how many visitors we have a year, I think or just border crossings, I should say, we had 420 million last year, border crossings, American citizens, visitors, whatever. Only 0.01% had electronic searches. Okay, so it's still very small.
Richard, could you repeat that number, please?
Sure. I think last year we had about 400 million border crossings, which would include American citizens and visitors and green card holders, everybody. In terms of electronic searches, it was only 0.01 electronic device searches. And to give us some data comparison, in 2015, electronic device searches at the border were under 5,000. In 2023, under Biden, it was 41,000. That number is going to explode. So, you know, I'm getting a lot of calls in my practice now from all kinds of folks, including American citizens, many of whom have been naturalized, saying, should I travel? I'm concerned about this, you know. And, you know, it is a concern because the Trump administration is talking about all kinds of things, including denaturalization. Now, the denaturalization initiative was actually started under Obama. And prior to that, it was really targeting people that became citizens, were later discovered to be terrorists or Nazi war criminals. Since Obama, and definitely under Trump 1, it's expanded to all kinds of things, including if they find out, particularly if they find out that you misrepresented any material facts on your prior immigration filings. So I think it's important to acknowledge, and this goes back to your point, Sunita, we're not here to create an alarmist mentality, you know, but it is good to be prepared, right? And it's good to understand what CBP is looking for and what they're allowed to do and that sort of thing. And
could I begin to ask you just a few questions? So how does CBP identify who to search?
Well, that's a good question.
Largely random or?
No, I don't think it's largely random, although they can initiate random. But I think it's good. A good way to answer that question is first talk about what Fourth Amendment rights do folks have coming into the border, whether they're American or foreign national. Fourth Amendment generally on U.S. soil generally protects everybody, okay, against unreasonable searches. However, CBP has special authority, and it's called the border exception. Within 100 miles of the border, CBP has expanded authority to stop and search without a warrant. And people think, well, that border zone is really just at the airport or a mile from the border in Detroit. Actually, no, it goes down to 100 miles. You know, I'm in Cleveland and we have Cedar Point Amusement Park up in Sandusky, Ohio, which is on the shores of Lake Erie. And CBP has a post on Lake Erie, on the border there in Sandusky. That's a high enforcement area. Border Patrol can pull people over on the road without reasonable cause because they're defending the nation, ostensibly.
Richard, sorry, what types of technology are being used to search phones and devices? And I'm sorry, I'm rushing through, but we need to.
Right. That's fine. That's fine. So we don't really know what technology they're using. They're not sharing that publicly. Maybe as litigation progresses in federal courts, we'll learn more. And that's kind of what we did with the international student revocation issues. But it's important to know that there's two types of searches at the border of devices. One is basic search and one is advanced. So a basic search would be just the officer kind of going through your cell phone and just, you know, going through your messages and your laptop and your folders and that kind of thing. Advanced search is much more invasive. They are using special forensic technology to download data. And it's important to note that the data that they download, they can retain for 15 years. Again, this also applies to American citizens. Americans do not have a right, as Zahra said, to they do have a right to access the U.S. They can't be denied entry. But Americans do not have the right to decline a electronic search of their devices at the border. And the border could confiscate those devices. And then typically they return them within 5 days after they did a data dump of all the data. So yeah, so it's really important to kind of prepare and, kind of do a risk assessment, as Zahra said, where do I fit on the spectrum of risk when I'm coming across the border? I mean, tourists, have one set of questions that I think they need to ask. International students and H-1B workers maybe have another set of questions to ask. Green card holders might have another question, and citizens. I mean, each one has their unique situation. A lot of the cases that we heard about tourists being detained at the border recently, a lot of them were because the border suspected them of intending to work illegally.
Illegally, yes. Richard,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I hate to interrupt you, but we've got two other
That's all
speakers
right.
to move on to, and we're going to circle back to you at the
Sure.
end for additional questions. So we move on to Xiao Wang, who will discuss incidents of people being coerced into giving up their green cards while trying to re-enter the U.S. These cases thus far are isolated incidents. And again, we don't want to be alarmist, but welcome, Xiao.
Thanks, Anita. I do. I think that's a great place to start, right? Like we're talking about, we're both entering in a world where like we haven't experienced before, right? And that the messaging overarching, like whether it's greater than 99%, how much greater than 99% is that like for most cases, this is like most green card holders are able to leave the US and return and re-enter the US without any issues. All right, but what we've seen, and this is a growing concern, is that there are specific cases of lawful permanent residents, right, being pressured by CBP officers to give up their green cards at the border. And so when we think about coercion, it's a combination of confusion, of fear, of misinformation, of stress. There's a lot going on at that time, right? And if you end up signing paperwork without fully understanding it and without being in front of an immigration judge, then this can mean losing their legal rights to live in the US, separating families, disrupting lives built over decades, right? So what is happening is that there's the CBP officers are asking some individuals and their green card holders, right, legal residents of the US, to sign what is called a Form I-407, which voluntarily gives up their green card. And the folks that have signed this or have been presented with this have been reported being misled about the consequences of not signing it and also not fully understanding what they're signing. And they were being told in some cases that they could no longer re-enter in the US or were pressured to sign or else, right? With a ambiguous what that or else means. So who is at risk? So first is our green card holders that are returning after long trips. So over 6 months. So again, related to how we started this conversation is that you have a legal right to re-enter the US as a permanent resident. So if you hold the green card, unless a judge decides otherwise, or unless you fall under a couple of like criteria and situations. And one of them is that they've been absent for a continuous period, meaning over 180 days. Which means that you could be interpreted or as abandoning your claim to U.S. permanent residence. And so those folks are getting the most aggressive questioning around what they were doing and what their intentions are coming back. The second group that have been getting more questions have been ones with conditional green cards with pending renewals. So they're waiting on converting, let's say they got married and they have a conditional green card and they're applying for a permanent green card. And so it's like you're actually in this like uncertain status. The third are people with complex immigration histories. We talked about this risk assessment, right? Like prior violations, prior denials, or any unresolved legal issues. And then finally, what we've seen, again, from an anecdotal perspective, because there's no actual data on this as of yet, there's like elderly green card holders, especially from Indian diaspora. So they have language barriers, they confusion, they're more vulnerable to this kind of pressure, and they have been caught under and have in some cases regretfully signed away their legal permanent residence. So quick summary here is like green card holders, right? When they're coming into the country, Customs and Border Patrol are allowed to ask you questions and allowed to detain you for a reasonable amount of time. How they think is reasonable may be different than how the rest of us feel like is reasonable, but they cannot revoke your green card. Only an immigration judge can do that, or only if you give it up voluntarily. And so you do not have to, no matter how they present it, sign this form I-407 that gives up voluntarily abandons your legal status as a permanent resident of the United States. And if you're unsure or feel pressured, you can say, hey, I do not wish to abandon my permanent residency, and you have a right to request a hearing in immigration court. And so from an advice standpoint, to summarize, it's like, that a big through line that we've seen is around like being able to prove that you have a continued life in the United States. So for those who are traveling abroad and are legal permanent residents, carry that information, show that your life is here, tax returns, leases, pay stubs, anything that shows that you're connected to the US, right? Conditional green card holders should fill out all of their expired previous green cards, all of their approved, additional documents and receipt notices. And try to avoid trips that are over 6 months, unless you've already applied for a reentry permit, unless, something is, when we talk about this non-essential, essential, like also within that bucket, think about like how long the trip is. And then once you're on your way back, like remain calm, respectful during the border encounter. You are required to tell the truth, right? So like just do not lie, or do not mislead it, but you can be firm about your rights around what you say at all, right? And then, and definitely do not sign any documentation before getting more advice, before having that time, before getting counsel, and before having a hearing in front of immigration judge. Let me stop there and.
Xiao, thank you. I wanted to see if you could expand on your comment of reports of elderly Asians being targeted. I think that's a concern for many of us on this call. And do they have rights? When they're being asked to give up their green cards, do they have rights at that point to ask for an attorney, especially if they're not native English speakers?
Yeah, so this is an interesting gray area where at that moment, right, it is different than being in front of a court or being arrested. They don't necessarily have a right to an attorney when they're talking to CBP. They do have a right to not say anything that isn't required of them, and they do have a right to not sign anything. And so what do they have a right to, right? So they you can clearly state that you don't want to abandon your permanent residence, and you can ask for a hearing with immigration judge. And then after you leave that interaction and you're in the United States, that's when you can then talk to an attorney and obviously talk to family members or get help depending on your level of language fluency. So you can ask the that they're basically, there's no guaranteed right to legal counsel during these initial Customs and Border Patrol screening. And then you do have a right to legal representation in immigration court, which is the only place that can deem that you have to strip away any of your legal permanent residency status. But it is important for you to have a plan in place, right? Who are the family members you're going to notify? Who are the attorneys that you do want to get involved if this ends up happening?
Yeah, there are a number of questions for you in the chat, Xiao, and I hope you address them there. We'll circle back to you for an additional round of questions. But we go next to Madhurima Paturi, who will talk about the impact of extreme vetting on foreign students and whether she expects that the U.S. will face a drop in enrollment this fall. Welcome, Madhu.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you for having me. You guys hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. So one of the alarm thing which you are mentioning earlier is the volume of the calls we received at the end of the March throughout the first 2 weeks of the April is outstanding, right? We have over 300 calls received from the different areas, especially the students who are on the F1 visa. So people are here on a F1 visa, either for undergrad, graduate studies, or the PhD, or different language courses. They could be on different kind of the degrees. They're here. What we saw is in the last week of the March, we started getting so many calls that their services got terminated. So it happens eventually sometimes if the service can get terminated for a lot of reasons, especially if you don't attend to the classes full time, or if you don't pay the fees on time, there is some kind of the health issues, you couldn't able to attend the classes, or certain percentage of time you don't involve in the classes, and other natural disasters, other reasons which is very common, service can terminate. Service is something, a system which was controlled by the ICE, therefore the Department of Homeland Security. Everybody has to be maintaining the service active while you are on the student visa. Okay, so here the services started terminating in the last week of the March. That's where we're getting all the phone calls. We thought that that's something naturally happening because of they may not be maintaining their status, or they may not maintaining the student visa otherwise. But what we saw in a couple of days, or probably within the less than 48 hours, we see hundreds of the calls are receiving for same reason, which is called a criminal check, otherwise not maintaining the status. That's like a new way of, like, why is everybody is getting the same one, right? Not everybody is under the criminal check. So then the students are started looking at themselves that what could have they done something wrong. So we thought that it may be somebody who got into trouble or given the fingerprinting somewhere at some point. It could be DUI, DWI, anything like we are thinking about aggravated felonies, those kind of things. But what we understood within a few hours is it could be as simple as driving slowly or driving fast, or not even paying for something as speeding ticket, or not turning on your signal light, as simple as those kind of the things. There, we actually found a few of them never even got into the law enforcement, which is surprising, right? And this probably other colleagues can also have the similar calls, like hundreds of these calls, right? What we came to know that it is as close as 5,000 student visas got terminated in less than 3 weeks, and which is very alarming. And a lot of them being me, South Asian, a lot of those calls are from South Asian clients. A lot of them are Indians, highly Indians are coming on the F1 and the H1, which we all know that. So there's nothing much could be done on that moment, because usually with the F1 status, you don't have the service active. Your status is gone on the same day. You don't have any status. So it started questioning a lot of questions that you don't have a legal status here.
Madhu, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what happens when your service is terminated that day? Do you have to deport that day?
So that's what it's right, because the volume of the cases we received. So we know that there is some kind of the class actions, or that legal actions could be happen. But at that moment, it was really nervous for these students. Their options are given is you don't have a status. Either you're going to be start occurring unlawful presence. You need to self-deport. Highly encouraged by the Department of Homeland Security. Every email they received was, you need to self-deport, and you need to report yourself self-deporting. There is 3 emails everybody received. One is revoking your visa from the consulate where you came from. There's other email from the SCVP saying that your account will be closed in next 15 days. And there's other email came from all the universities from the DSO saying that we checked your records, you got terminated, right? These are the 3 emails, majority of them received. And some of them may or may not have received visa revocal from the consulate, but this is such a common the pattern which we see from 3 emails receiving from the 3 departments, Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, and from the school. So a lot of them are about to graduate. Can you believe that they're about to graduate? We are at the end of the April and May. Most of them are getting graduated, and a lot of them are also on the CPT and OPT, which is their work permit. They could able to continue to work after the graduation. They can't able to work. They can't go to the school from the day you received that email. You can't able to attend the class. You couldn't take your finals. And a lot of them who were not really involved in any kind of the charges, forget about are they convicted or no, just as mere as getting the charges, right? So they were worried that they can't able to continue. So hoping that they want to leave, self-deported themselves and come back clean, right? Because they were not really involved in any charges. So a lot of them self-deported themselves. And guess what? Finally, we have some legal actions, lawsuits happen. Over 100 of the lawsuits kind filed, and more than 50 of the TROs was issued, restraining orders. And finally, they started looking into it. Department of Justice came back on last Friday, and say that ICE is going to restore the service. So it just happened on Friday. A lot of them got restored, but the question and the biggest concern here is what happened to the students self-deported themselves. Their visas was revoked, and Department of State is different to the Department of Homeland Security. I'm sure there will be a lawsuit on the Department of State, but how long it takes, what happens, their graduations, their work permits, these all will create some kind of alert to the future visas, right, for them to come back. And that's their biggest concern now, not just their concern coming to the United States. A lot of the students who called me, they're concerned that is that a alert for even going to the different countries, right? Is that going to be a big mark for them? Did they ever got deported, or these kind of the answers has to be answered for the different embassies around the world. That was the biggest concern. I think that it was all played by one switch of the button, as the other colleagues are mentioned, that some AI system, they are looking for the criminal checks, and they didn't even look at it, what exactly the students had. They just put everybody in one bucket and started terminating. Even the schools kind of surprised in the beginning. They were thinking that, oh, this is a regular service termination. Okay, we'll give you the I-20s, right? Which we saw in the last week of the March. Within 24 hours, all these schools, they kind of getting hundreds of this. They turned around and say that, guess what? We need time. We are not going to issue any reinstatements at this point. So it took almost 4 to 5 weeks for the ICE to come back and say that they're going to reinstate. This is something largely they run something, a digital thing. They figured out all these people are somehow involved somewhere. So, which is really created a lot of alarm. Obviously, yes, you're right. That could definitely affect a lot of students coming in the future. Is it even worth it? If they are looking at the speeding ticket, which is a very common, I'm sure most of us will have it at this call. I don't want to pick on the numbers, but this is such a natural thing as a human being, go through those things. Is that a problem for the future to come? Is it something I have to worry about it? And remember, all these students, most of them don't have scholarships. They're putting their money as an investment for the future as a career. That means that US universities is going to be losing a lot of the income for the future for sure.
Madhu, thank you so much. We have so many questions here for all of our speakers. Let's go to Tani Gokhale from India Currents. Tani, could you please ask your question?
Sure. Thank you so much for being here. This is really helpful. My question is about non-citizens when they're entering the country at the airport. What are their rights to an attorney and how do they access it? So when they're being questioned by an authority at the airport, do they have access to a call, or can they call someone? Can they look up, I don't know, can they Google search immigration attorneys and find out an attorney if they don't have? Ideally, I know that they should have one before they even travel. But could you just talk about the nitty-gritties of how you can access the right to an attorney for non-citizens when they enter?
Madhu, would you please respond to that question?
Others may answer on that too. I mean that you can always say that, but I don't know it's a right though. I don't know, maybe Richard and Wang maybe answered that one.
I answered it in the chat, but basically at your primary screening, the case like law and like what CBP positions, you don't have a right to an attorney, right? They can ask you questions. And if you're a non-US citizen and you refuse to answer questions, they could deny entry. But if they pull you into secondary screening, then you're technically considered detained. And then you have the rights of every other detainee, meaning you have a right to remain silent, you have a right to an attorney, and then you can, and that's like, it's a different kind of situation. But when you first get off the airplane, go in front of the agent, like, the CBP positions, you don't have a right to an attorney at that point.
Vijay Sundaram has a question. Vijay, could you please ask your question? I'll ask it for her in the interest of time. Is it legal for the U.S. to deny a green card holder the right to re-enter the U.S., saying that the fact that they come back after a prolonged stay in their homeland country, even if it is within the allowable 6 months, indicates that they are not keen on living in the U.S.? Xiao, could you please answer that question?
Yeah, so the technical definition here is looking at, do they consider you seeking a mission or not, right? So as a green card holder, for the vast majority of situations, you are not considered seeking a mission. You have a right to re-enter the country, and that's part of you having legal permanent status. Now, if you're considered under seeking a mission, then there's a set of criteria that they have that covers that even a green card holder will be considered seeking a mission. And that includes that you've abandoned your status, right? So you've signed off paperwork around it, that you've been absent for more than 180 days, that you have engaged in illegal activity after departing the United States, right? That you're in removal proceedings since departing the United States. There's a set of criteria here that you have to meet to be considered under seeking a mission. And then again, going back to where I started is, you are not required to sign anything, and the only way that they can strip you of a valid legal permanent resident status is through immigration court, and so then you have right to an attorney in the process there.
Yeah, Orhan Akur asked a really important question. Orhan, do you want to ask your question live? Okay, in the interest of time, I'll ask it for him. How can I locate a family member or friend who may have been detained by the CBP? I think that's a great question, and I wonder if any.
I put the link. I put the link in reply.
Okay, could you just talk a little bit about that, Madhu?
If you have the A number, you can look at it. If not, you can just put by the name and the country of the birth and the date of birth. You can look into that, the link I provided there.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I'd like to go back to each of you for your 1 minute sound bites. What is the most important portion of your remarks that you hope to leave reporters with? Richard, let's start with you.
You're on mute, Richard.
Thank you. We have very little time, so I'm just going to jump into it. A lot of talk about not having the right to counsel at the border. That's true. Not the right to have physical counsel. We could have virtual counsel. So I represent a lot of people that have sensitive border crossings, and we know they're sensitive border crossings before they're coming across. So we prepare for that, whether they have a small conviction history, like this Mr. Schmidt. He's a green card holder for decades. He just got detained at the border because he had a marijuana conviction that was 10 or 20 years old. These folks, what they should be doing is maybe not traveling at all, but if they're going to be traveling or they're out of the U.S. for an extended period of time, they should talk to an attorney and plan for the reentry. They could have an attorney draft the G-28 saying, I represent this person. They can have the attorney write a cover letter. They can have the attorney help draft an affidavit and prepare and assemble the supporting evidence. For example, what Xiao was talking about, abandonment issues. Abandonment is all about intent. And it's not just a set time of 6 months or 1 year. It's about travel history. It's all kinds of things. So that should be done in advance, not when an elderly couple is coming over the border having just finished a 20-hour flight, right, who may not be able to speak English very well. That packet can be prepared in advance, and in secondary, they can say, hey, I do have an attorney, and this is what my attorney would like you to know. Will the border read it? I can't guarantee it, but I think the supervisor will. So I think for people that are concerned about abandonment issues, abandonment of green cards or a permanent residency or criminal case or any sensitive border crossing issue, talk to an attorney, get a G28 signed in advance so the attorney can contact the border and ICE and different things later, and also prepare documents in advance.
Thank you so much, Richard. Madhu, would you like to give your soundbite for reporters?
Sure. I think it's at this time of the moment, being proactive, right? Everybody is going to agree with that, being proactive. Even I'm telling to my US citizen friends, just do carry the US passport card or something to soft copy. If we can avoid somebody stopping us to talking about it, let's do it, right? There's no way they can tell based on how we look like we are US citizens or no. If we have to avoid, let's do it if we can do that, And the same thing with we're talking about elderly Asian parents, which is a common question in my office also. If you are a frequent traveler, if it is a non-essential travel, can we stop this for a little while, And if you do carry some kind of the ties with the US, right? Either it's your pay stubs, your business, your house, your whatever the bills are, just the tax returns, have something. Yes, you do have a soft copies. I agree with that. But if you can, please do print and have the package ready. When the officer asks, here it is. I'm prepared for this, right? So let's have that less conversation that leads to less questions so you can get it out faster. And for my friends on the F1, H1B, it's not just the visa doesn't give you automatic coming into the United States. Okay, you still have to go through the CBP. You have the USCIS, which gets approved. You have the visa of the Department of State, you get approved. You don't get into the United States until you get through the CBP, which is the most important thing. Whatever the requirements you chose to send to the previous departments, you have to have the same package at the CBP. Make sure that you have all the documents for the school, including your loans for the school, your house residency requirements, everything else. If you are already in the school, make sure that you have the transcripts, everything else to make sure that you are actually continuing to be in the school. Same thing with the H1Bs. A lot of them are on the H1Bs. If you change the employer, make sure that you have all those documents, up-to-date client information. So I think that just being a proactive, have as much as documentation with you, try to avoid that further questioning is very, very important.
Thank you, Madhu. Xiao, final word to you.
I mean, we're in unprecedented times, right? Like this is like folks who are not U.S. citizens, and even in some cases U.S. citizens are under heightened scrutiny in a way that we haven't seen before. The general advice we give is just know your rights before you go, right? Don't assume that the border agent has final say over your immigration status. Don't sign anything that you don't understand as other folks. Be as prepared as you can be with all the documents that are relevant to your case in advance. And if that something doesn't feel right, ask questions, ask for time, right? Assert your right to see a judge. Like the right information the green card holders and valid visa holders and everyone really can protect their legal status and travel with more confidence.
Speakers, thank you so much for your very insightful remarks today at this briefing. Reporters, thank you for joining us as well, and we'll see you next Friday.